David McCullough.
I feel very strongly, and I've experimented with this myself as a guest professor at Cornell one term. I strongly believe that we should bring what I would call the lab technique to the teaching of the humanities, in the sense of getting students to go into the lab, as it were, and work out the answer or the solution or the understanding of a subject or a problem on their own, or working with other students. If I were assigned, it would depend, of course, at what level I'm teaching it. If I were teaching it at the college level, I think I would go about it this way. I would assign 4 students to work together and 4 other students to work together, and 4 more. And each of them would be assigned to know about one single person who participated in the Constitutional Convention. And they would be required to either present a report or to get up and say, my name is James Madison, here's the life I had, here's what happened to me. And they would work at a table with 4 at a table, because that way you would get to know what the other 3 at your table also did or didn't do. But enter it by the individual life of each of these protagonists, and see them as human beings. See them as fallible people struggling to do something right that's extremely difficult to achieve, and what they went through. I'd assign one person to do nothing but study what the weather was in Philadelphia that summer. We know what weather is like, summers are like in Philadelphia. Imagine you're cooped up in a building, in a room, and you can't tell anybody what you're doing, and everybody's after you to find out. This has its own intrinsic kind of drama. But the essence of the pull of history is people. And to see them as not figures in a history book, names in a history, but as human beings. What was it like for them? And it always, always works. And I'd do one more thing, and that is tell each student you can get help any way, from anywhere you want. That's how you accomplish things in life. You don't have to do it all yourself. Enlist your parents in the project. Get somebody that you know who's an expert to talk with you. Use the telephone. Ask questions. We don't train students well enough, in my view, to ask questions. They're always required to have answers, but the way you find out in life is to ask questions. Pull it out of people. There isn't a single person that any of us ever meets who doesn't know something we don't know. Interview them.
Hold it close.
I guess I want to take issue with the fundamental proposition that politics is separate from understanding the Constitution. I mean, understanding the writing and ratification of the Constitution is understanding politics. And I think today the problem is that Americans think that politics is so much worse than at any time in our history, or that, or even worse than that, they don't feel any connection between themselves and their government. The government is something in Washington or in their state capital. I think there's just, because people don't care or want to learn about history enough, I think that they don't understand the extent to which a lot of these things have always been true. That, you know, the process of having a constitutional convention was fraught with controversy. The dynamics of the Constitutional Convention were bitterly contested. The ratification contest was a slugfest. And I think that, and then I think, Peter, you talked about the 1790s. The politics of the Jeffersonians and the Federalists in the 1790s is every bit as bitter and vituperative as it is today. So I think that another of the points that we can make as history teachers is that it's not so different in the founding era as it is today. It's just the sense of ownership, the sense of connection we feel with the political process and with our involvement in it that makes it different. And I think there's a real opportunity in teaching the founding period to show that it wasn't so different.
Akil.
I like team exercises. If I were in high school, I would definitely have kids work in teams. So I like that a lot. There are actually, I love role plays, good, where, and one advantage, and see, the earlier we can, you have to develop a taste for these things, and the earlier you can introduce people to there are many acquired tastes, and there are a bunch of things that aren't fun at the beginning, but are fun after a little bit. My kids are now, after 3 years, beginning to actually play piano, as in playing, as in actually having fun, and the first 2.5 years weren't so fun, and now it's fun. I do think that one advantage of the presidency is it's very personal. It remains our most personal office, and so it's a really good way of getting people interested in contemporary politics, to learn about past politics, and organized around these very colorful personalities. So when I'm a kid, you know, these little potted Bob's Merrill 178-page little histories actually kind of get me interested. So I agree, you have to get people interested. And there's probably a different way maybe of doing it for science than in math, and maybe a different thing for music. But I like teams, I like role plays, and I definitely like the presidency in particular because it's very personal.
Kyle.
Well, if I can just reflect on some of the experiences we've had here at OU in the last few years where we've founded a Constitution program and have enjoyed, I think, some initial successes. So yes, I'm bragging a little bit. We haven't let a fear of politics impede us. The Constitution's always politicized, but it's one of our principles that the Constitution is bigger than politics. And the ground rule of our program has been that the Constitution isn't conservative or liberal, but that it's the framework within which we decide our political fate. And so we've worked hard to create authentic political representation for conservatives and liberals within our program, and I think it's been really an element of our success. Now, reflecting on that, there are one of two explanations. One is that possibly we're starting to see an age where this is becoming an exciting topic again for academics, and we're past some of the academic culture wars, or we have David Boren, and everybody respects him, so it's easy. Maybe a little bit of both.
All right, I do want to invite those of you who'd like to pose your own question to move to the microphone here on my left, right up front, at any point. If I see someone there, I'll call on you. The phones are open. You know, this morning, Peter Onuf spoke of needing a renewal every 19 years or so, every generation of the Constitution, that the idea was that our so-called founding fathers spoke out then, but what about now? Have we reached a point in our history, Akil Amar, where you believe we need to gather ideas for taking a look at the mistakes and some of the wrongdoing that the Constitution... What happened? Oh, I'm so sorry. Is he all right? Are you all right? Okay. Oh, coming to the microphone. All right. Please be careful of those stairs. Woo! Woo! Have we reached that point, Akil?
2 or 3, I like to get people expressing opinions. This is especially true in a law school. So my version of David's assignment, these teams, might be who's the most overrated president? Who is the most underrated? Just something where they actually have to take a position. What were the biggest mistakes in the past? What do you think the 5 biggest challenges of the future are going to be? Something, again, we could have teams, and you could even sort of compete to win a prize for your team for the most interesting answer to that. But I do think, just finally, on the challenges of our world, they are global challenges created by the internet and climate change and international terrorism. And so some of the answers that we inherited don't make sense because those answers presuppose old world over there, new world here. We'll just sort of keep them at bay and do our own thing. And that's not their future. But get them to, what are the 5 things that are going to be the biggest challenges of the next 20 years? That would be a fun team assignment. And the answer is going to have to be political.
Who else wants to respond? Rosemary.
I think it'd be interesting to ask you all, to ask students, to ask any audience, if they wanted to take advantage of the clause in the Constitution that would allow us to call another constitutional convention. In our history, it's never been done. We had one constitutional convention, but the Constitution does provide procedures by which we, the people, can reconstitute ourselves as a convention of the people and have a whole new document. And frankly, I think if people would take that exercise seriously and start thinking about what a whole new constitution would look like, written out of whole cloth, I think they would, 1, have a greater appreciation of the founders, and 2, I think they would appreciate the challenges of governing today in a more full way.
David McCullough.
I really, truly believe it all comes back to, or down to, or up to leadership. And leadership at all levels, but particularly political leadership. Here we are in one of the great universities of our country, a state university, in which the president teaches a course on civics. Imagine a president who's responsible for an enormous budget for 44,000 people, if you count the employees and the students, with all that he has to contend with, takes time out to teach that course every year. I don't know of another president of a major university that teaches a course. Maybe there are some. But the point is, we lead by example. And our politicians have to do the same thing. And so do the people in the media. We must not... I think it's appalling that we have people on television regularly, every day, reporting the nation's events and the world's events, who, 1, can't really properly use the English language, and who, 2, don't seem to ever read books. It is not coincidental, in my view, that the strongest, most admirable presidents we've had have all been students of history. Many of them have been the authors of history. When George Marshall was first appointed Secretary of the State by Harry Truman, he was asked at a press conference, "Did you have a good education at VMI, Virginia Military Institute?" He said, "No, I didn't." They said, "Why not, sir?" He said, "Because they taught no history. A leader has to know history." So we've got to have leaders in the media, leaders in the press, leaders in institutions such as this, who take this cause to heart and do something about it. There is nothing wrong with the younger generation. The younger generation is terrific. And any problems they have, any failings they have in what they know and don't know and how they use the English language is not their faults, it's our faults. And we've got to hold the media responsible. And this turning of our political life and the future of the world into a sports event, where it's all about who's ahead and what the polls are. And the questions they ask at these so-called debates, inane. It's as if they're playing down the lowest common denominator. And we've got to demand more of them.
All right. We have two people at the microphone. In fact, we have three. Please go ahead with your question.
First, Mr. McCullough, I would like to thank you. I'm a public school elementary teacher here in the state of Oklahoma, so thank you for your kind words about what we do in the classroom. I would like to pick your minds of this esteemed panel. I teach in this state American history in the 5th grade. However, my class, my test does not count, that we are not reading or mathematics. However, I fully believe that I am the one that is helping to prepare my students to be citizens and to eventually to take care of me. So what are your thoughts on what I should do as a professional and what I should do to help make the Constitution count in Oklahoma?
Peter Honeck. Peter.
This is how to make the Constitution compelling for your students?
No, that I can do.
Oh, okay. All right, good.
How do I encourage the powers to be in the state of Oklahoma that American history in the elementary level should be counted, or does that clarify my question? Because this is directly off the top of my head, I'm sorry.
Yeah, so how can we persuade the powers that be that what you're doing has civic significance and therefore should count?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, are there any legislators in the House right now? I mean, that's a wonderful, difficult question. I think David is championing at the bit to answer it.
Could I make one suggestion to your question and also a kind of follow-up to David's point about the media? Could we generate some media of our own? Could, for example, in the state of Oklahoma, this institution find a way to recognize and to broadcast the successes that are happening in the classroom, to reward the teachers and the students by that kind of attention, partly to educate our other leaders, and also to encourage a sense of the possibilities of things that really are working in the classroom.
If I understand your question correctly, one of the problems is that, and this is everywhere, that because of the emphasis on reading and math, they have pretty much not just pushed history to the back burner, they put it off the stove. And but I think there's a very good solution to that, and that is fine, stress math, fine, stress reading. Could we please, when we think about reading something worthwhile, read the literature of history? Certainly. Read Lincoln's second inaugural address. Read the letters from Birmingham jail. Read the great passages from the classic history that's been written about the country, whether it's something that was written last month or something that was written 100 years ago. And let them discover not just the pull of history, but again, how these people and those moments can come back to life if conveyed with a powerful use of our language. And I couldn't agree more about it. It has to be done early. If you want to get a child interested in the Founding Fathers, have them read a book called Ben and Me by Robert Lawson.
We do.
You know it? It's about a mouse who lived in Ben Franklin's hat.
Good. Good.
And I encountered him, my first revisionist historian, when I was 6. And he said that all of Ben's great ideas were wonderful, but they weren't Ben's, they were his, Amos. Right. And it's very well researched, it's superbly written. I have used it with my own children, with my own grandchildren. It always works.
All right.
These things work, generation after generation. Always get them to read above their level, and never ask them to read junk, boring, tedious history. And forget about memorizing dates. That's what books are for. You can look them up.
All right. Thank you. Thank you. Pete.
I do have something I'd like to say in response to this, and that is some of my most satisfying teaching is with teachers in Teach American History programs and Gilder Lehrman programs. And the bad news is that all of these programs, the TAH is out, and Gilder Lehrman's in trouble, is something like the American Constitution Center. And this is all because we're too heavily taxed. That's about what it comes down to, folks. I don't mean to be offensive. I know it's Oklahoma. But if you want to invest in the future, that's what it means. This doesn't come for nothing.
Howdy, guys. Thank you very much for coming to our great university. Thank you very much, Diane, for moderating the discussion so beautifully. My question deals with the world. Our Constitution is our document, but people in every country in the world look at it and look to it. What are the difference in the challenges, the importance, the opportunities of teaching the Constitution at Peking University or University of Cairo or in Seoul, South Korea, versus teaching it here in our country? And is it even important to do so? And if any of you have any experience doing so, what were the challenges and what were the surprises that you had?
I'll take a shot at it's a very interesting question. There's been a recent article suggesting that the American Constitution has lost some of its influence abroad. And there's no doubt in the basic structure of our government, that is the separation of powers, versus the parliamentary system, the British system, that our system has not been copied as much as the British system. But it is extraordinary to look around and see how much our Constitution has influenced the world. First of all, just the whole idea of a Constitution. When you think about a Constitution now, it's a written document. If Iraq's going to have a Constitution, if Afghanistan's going to have a Constitution, it's going to be a written document. That was our influence. One thing we haven't mentioned, which has been very influential, is the idea of an independent judiciary. Other states, including Great Britain, Britain just created a Supreme Court. They finally lifted a few of the members of the House of Lords out of the House of Lords and said, you're going to be our Supreme Court. And that's just been in the last 2 years. So in a Bill of Rights, other states in Europe have adopted Bills of Rights. Independent judiciary, the ratification, the whole idea of referendums, these are all things that came out of American experience. So even though our separation of powers, that is to say, we do not allow members of the ministry, the cabinet, to simultaneously hold office in the legislature, which is exactly what the British mandated. That system of separation of powers has not been copied. In all other respects, we've been very, very influential around the world.
Gordon, I'm very glad to hear you say that, because I said something in a very similar in a blog post on the National Constitution Center website in response to a very interesting article in the New York Times by Adam Liptak, in which he suggested that the rest of the world was really not following the American model. And I said, really, the headline is the rest of the world is becoming democratic and American and with a Bill of Rights and judicial review. And those are the very, and then the other things are smaller issues of institutional detail. And the presidentialist model of a separate executive has worked particularly poorly in South America. It's led to a sense of gridlock. The legislature is controlled by one group, the presidency by a different party. There's a perception that things don't get done, presidents get frustrated, and so then they start to try to just govern by executive decree, unilateralism. This has led in South America to caudillos and coups. We see some possible pathologies even in the United States with divided government, presidents being tempted to do all sorts of things by executive order. And so there is a very interesting question about, and it's not just true of the US Constitution, it's true of 50 state constitutions, where governors are elected independently of state legislatures, where the legislature might be controlled by a different party than the governor. And it is a very interesting question whether that's the better model. It is the American model.
There is another dimension of American constitutionalism which seems increasingly relevant, and that is federalism. We have deeply conflicted feelings about our own federal history, but the fact is that Europe is on the verge of failure. The Eurozone is going to fall apart, which could have global implications of a disastrous order, and that what they can't do is what's built into our system, a system of burden sharing and of transfer of payments. I mean, we can handle things that the world will need to handle on an increasingly large scale.
But isn't there another issue there? I heard Governor Jerry Brown of California say the other day that if the legislature won't agree to something, it goes to the people. And the people can create a referendum and decide that way. It is truly taking the government or the governing of that state to the people. How does that fit into the larger picture?
I think this kind of direct democracy is probably a little dangerous. And our representative system has worked very well, but there are increasing uses of this kind of, well, it came out of the progressive era, which itself was a period in which politics seemed to be dead, ward bosses were in control, and I think it's very similar to our own time, that the gross inequalities of wealth were enormous, and I think a lot of reforms were passed that led to the use of ballot initiatives and referendums. I think we don't really want to go down that path. I know Colorado is really suffering from this. They're all over the place. They're having referendums to repeal previous referendums. And it becomes a very dangerous situation. You know, there is the possibility, technically, within a half century or maybe shorter, where we as a people directly could vote on the budget. You could say every April 15th, the people will have internet connection and will decide yes or no on the budget. This kind of direct democracy is possible. Whether it's the best way to run a democracy with 300+ million is, I think, problematic.
I think we have time for one last question, sir.
Hello, everybody.
Hello.
Sorry
I
for
hope
the
you're all right.
interruption, the distraction on the fall. I was a teenager when the Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal got started. And right early on, a bunch of New Deal legislation got slammed down by the Supreme Court. And Franklin Roosevelt's solution was to pack the court. Let's get some more people on the court, and then we'll get the majority in favor of the New Deal. And another challenge is the Warren Court, and more recently, the United Citizens, where corporations, no limits on campaign contributions, so that the super PACs now sometimes outpace the regular campaign money. And my point is that if I were teaching the Constitution, I would think it very important historically to come against and explain and discuss those points where the Constitution was really challenged. And part of that would be the drama to getting a new amendment. And so I just think, the students would get excited about the challenges.
All right, thank you. Akil.
So I liked Rosie's suggestion that we could, Rosemary's suggestion that we could ask students what they think about a constitutional convention. I've gone around to classrooms as young as first graders, and one question I've asked them is a Jefferson-like question: what amendment? What do you think should be in the Constitution that isn't, or is, forget even, a constitutional convention across the board. And I've got to tell you that I learned some amazing things from first graders. I remember once I went and I said, what would you put in the Constitution? And one first grader said, no drugs.
No what?
No drugs. And so I thought about that. I said, that's a very, good idea. Drugs are very bad, and your life is going to be a lot better. And then I thought, we did have this with prohibition, and it didn't work so well. And honestly, that was the first time in my life I began to think maybe it's possible this war on drugs, won't end so well. And I'm not taking a strong position on that. I'm saying, asking kids, young people, something like, a lot of them said ERA, and we talked about that, and these are first graders and third graders and fifth graders.
Any other
Well,
comment?
I'd just like to add something off this topic about resources for studying the Constitution. Some of you may know that about the documentary history of the ratification of the Constitution, which is a wonderful documentary project being done at Madison, Wisconsin. And the documentary edition is now available online with other papers of the founders, so that we've had these wonderful editorial editions that nobody has ever looked at. They are now available, and they're getting wonderful use. And for advanced high school and college students, you can now look at the ratification debates. You can do word searches. You can read them. And they're not just available at university libraries. They're available now. The stripped-down edition, thanks to a Mellon grant, is available universally. And the documentary, with all the documentary materials, you can get it through libraries such as OU's library that have rights to do so. But it's a wonderful and democratic move in terms of information availability and accessibility. It's going to be very empowering for a future generation of students, and I hope for a future generation of legislators reflecting on our history.
Could I just add to that, because this documentary collection, which is now about almost 25 volumes of debates over democracy and all the issues of equality, liberty, representation, federalism. All of these issues are debated, and it's the greatest collection of debates on these issues of democracy in the history of the world. Now, it may be that 5th century Greeks had a richer debate, but we don't know about it. And maybe 17th century England had a rich, really rich debate. We only know a fragment of what went on. But here we have 25 volumes of people, ordinary people, in these ratification conventions, debating these fundamental issues of how much government should we have, how much liberty, how much freedom, how much representation, what does representation mean, all of these basic issues. And it's all now, as Peter says, available online. It's an extraordinary collection, and I must say, much neglected by political theorists and historians.
Well, thank all of you so much. How privileged we've been this afternoon to have all of these people here with us. I do want to leave you on one positive note, and especially for our teacher. The Oklahoma Foundation for Excellence has joined with local school boards all across the state of Oklahoma and with our institute and others. And of all the 50 states now, we are sending more teachers per capita in terms of our population than any other state to Colonial Williamsburg to learn how to teach and to experience colonial history. So it's nice to be #1 in that area, and I think it shows our appreciation.